Hello everyone, a very warm welcome. We are on our journey of discussion of JEE Mains 2021 paper. The 2021 year is a year of hope and of course a great learning. So let's use this question paper as a tool to understand the patterns and to unlayer the questions. Let's begin. Let's straight away dive into this question which says which of the following reagent is suitable for the preparation of the following product, which is this product given to you. Let's observe the starting compound here. You can see that the double bonds are untouched. So we have to choose a reagent very wisely. The only thing that's happening is you can see the carbonyl compound, the CO group, is getting reduced. So choose the reducing agent very carefully here, right? So let's see what's going on. We have NaBH4, we have hydrazine in the presence of sodium ethoxide, we have nickel in the presence of hydrogen, and we have red phosphorus in the presence of chlorine. Let's do one thing. Let's see the behavior of each one of them. Let's begin with sodium boron hydride, which is the known compound for the conversion of a carbonyl compound like aldehyde ketone into alcohol. But here the agenda is to convert the carbonyl into CH2 group, right? So this is what you have to take care of. So NaBH4 is ruled out. The other one, the famous reagent that you use in HVZ reaction, Hell-Volhard-Zielinski reaction. So what do? We must have a carboxylic acid. That carboxylic acid should have a alpha carbon. That alpha carbon should have an alpha hydrogen. And if that is there, you know that halogenation happens, right? So halogenation of carboxylic acids at the alpha carbon is what this reagent is famous for. So this possibility is also ruled out. The other possibility is certainly ruled out, which is of nickel in the presence of hydrogen. Why? This will reduce all the double bonds and make it into a single bond, right? We are not doing any kind of hydrogenation here on a double bond. Double bond needs to be untouched. So, what must strike your mind is the name reaction here, a very famous reduction here, which is Wolff-Kishner reduction. The moment you see hydrazine, NH2NH2, Wolff-Kishner reduction must strike your mind. So what happens is that the reaction of aldehydes or ketones with hydrazine produces hydrazone. Simple way to imagine it is, imagine this carbonyl compound and write this H2 of the hydrazine just adjacent to the carbonyl so that you can easily remove this water molecule. And if you do, what you get is what we are calling as hydrazone. And this is not just sufficient. Then you would have to add a base, right? So this is clear. When we are adding to this carbonyl compound, the simple thing that's happening, though the compound may look very complex, but very small little thing is happening here. The unlayering is just realizing that the carbonyl compound needs to be reduced. That's it. So this is first what we get. We get a hydrazone, and then what do? Reaction with a base and heat converts the hydrazone to alkane, which was what our agenda was. Check it out. So after adding sodium ethoxide, after heating it, this is converted into CH2, which is what our agenda was. So the right answer, the overall reaction, I'm sure is what now is in your realm. Check it out. This is what was the agenda. So hydrazine in the presence of sodium ethoxide was the desirable reagent here. The reduction's name is Wolff-Kishner reduction. The right answer to this question becomes none other than option B. Now let's check this very breezy question which says that in Buna S stands for. What do you think? Simple, huh? S stands for simple here. So let's check out the options: sulfonation, strength, sulfur, styrene. You must know it. Buna S, right? So here S stands for styrene. You must know it. Let's check. So styrene butadiene, you know, copolymer of 1,3-butadiene, and styrene is Buna S. Let's in fact decode every alphabet here: Bu, Na and S. So when I talk about Bu, it stands for butadiene here. Na, you know, is the name for the sodium, whereas when we talk about the Latin of sodium, it is natrium. and S stands for styrene, and this is what the question was, so it becomes a very breezy question. The answer to this question becomes option D, styrene. What is tea without tea leaves, and what is a JEE Mains paper without a question on aromaticity? Let's straight away check out this question based on aromaticity, which says which one of the following compounds is non-aromatic. And the options are, you can see we have this cyclohepta-1,3,5-triene. We have a furan ring here, we have oxygen, so it's a heterocyclic system where the lone pair of oxygen will participate in resonance, and hence 6 pi electrons are the number of pi electrons getting delocalized, right? You know exactly which rule am I talking about here. Next one, you can see option C. We can see here also 2 pi electrons, and the perfect thing is here we have 2 carbons with a plus over them, making them perfectly planar. All carbons are in the same plane, and when the charges are involved making a particular compound aromatic, we are here talking about quasi-aromaticity, right? And option D, you can certainly see it's like 3 benzene rings fused together. We call it anthracene. So it's a benzenoid system, very much aromatic. So let's do one thing before we start talking about the right answer, which I'm sure all of you already know. Let's quickly recapitulate and reinforce the conditions for aromaticity. So for a compound to be aromatic, make sure there should be planarity, there should be conjugation, there must be a ring, right? There must be a cyclocompound. And most important, the Huckel's rule must be obeyed. So what is Huckel's rule? Let's check it out. Simple. If there is a compound which is cyclo, which is planar, and where there is conjugation, what can be there? There must be 4n plus 2 pi electrons, which are delocalized. So what is this n here? N is nothing but integer with a positive value, or I can say whole number. It can be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and so forth, right? So n here is clear, 4n plus 2 pi electrons. So these are the total number of pi electrons in a molecule that should be there. If let's say there are 4n pi electrons and all the other conditions are same, then it becomes anti-aromatic, right? But for non-aromatic, one way to see it is if something is not aromatic and anti-aromatic becomes automatically non-aromatic. That's one way to see it. The other way is quickly look for the carbon which is out of the plane. Sometimes it may be deceiving. Sometimes things may look that everything is in one plane, right? Like, in cyclo-octa-tetraene kind of a system. Look at this. Here it may give you a feeling that it's anti-aromatic, but that there is non-planarity here. So make sure you know the exceptions also here, all the different non-planar compounds also here. But the one which was given to us was very simple. You know that here when we have the 7-membered ring with 3 pi bonds, we have one of the carbons which is sp3 hybridized. The moment you see there is this sp3 hybridized carbon, you know that there is non-planarity coming, and if there is non-planarity coming, you know that it's going to be non-aromatic. Also, you can see that there's this double bond, single, single, double. That makes it a non-conjugated system as well. So, if I talk about the right answer, it's none other than option A, the right answer for this question. Now, let's test our skills with this question, which says, which one of the following carbonyl compounds cannot be prepared by addition of water on an alkyne? So water on an alkyne in the presence of HgSO4 and H2SO4. So the skills will be tested here. What all skills? Number 1, whether you know which rule to apply here, Markovnikov rule or anti-Markovnikov rule. Number 2, whether you know here tautomerization or not, right? And number 3, if you know the mechanism, then you will get high definition clarity. So let's see the options straight away. We have here in option A, ethanol, there is an aldehyde. In B, we have a ketone, okay. In C, we have aldehyde, which is propanol, okay. And in fourth, we have a ketone again. So let's decode the question by first realizing which rule to obey here. And you must know that the moment we are talking about this particular reaction of HgSO4 in the presence of dilute sulfuric acid with alkyne, right? It gives addition of water as per Markovnikov's rule, right? And what is Markovnikov's rule? What does this rule talk about? Let's also decode that, right? So this rule is a very simple rule which helps us in making us understand where the negative part of the addendum. What is an addendum? The adding molecule. So we are talking about an adding molecule which has a negative part and a positive part. So Markovnikov rule helps us in determining where this negative part will get attached. Okay, so let's read what the rule says. So the rule says that the negative part of addendum gets attached to carbon atom which possesses lesser number of hydrogen atoms. Once we see the mechanism, this Markovnikov rule will become HDCC, high definition crystal clear. So let's take a look, right? What we are talking about is acid catalyzed hydration. So let's check out reaction adds an OH with Markovnikov regioselectivity. Regioselectivity. It's not that the negative part can add anywhere. There is some regioselectivity. When we are talking about an unsymmetrical alkyne, right? When we are talking about unsymmetrical alkyne, why? Because if there is symmetrical, then we will not even realize what's going on. Okay? So let's get the point right here that the reaction adds an OH with Markovnikov's selectivity to form an enol. And once you see this enol, what should strike the doors of your mind is of course tautomerization. So enol product then tautomerizes to form a keto form. Let's do one thing. Let's take a look at the mechanism. For that, you must know what reagent are we using. So that is already clear. We are using HgSO4, H2SO4 in the presence of water. So using this reagent, let's take an unsymmetrical alkyne and let's see what will be the product, right? So let's test this particular smallest alkyne possible, which is ethyne. Okay, let's start with this and then we will take it forward. So let's start with ethyne, the smallest ethyne possible. So let's add water, let's add H2SO4, let's add HgSO4. You know what's going to happen. The OH, the negative part of the adding molecule water here, the negative part is OH minus, gets added to that carbon which has less number of hydrogen. So here, since it's symmetrical, it is the smallest alkyne. So we can do one thing, we can add at any of the carbons of your choice. Okay, so let's add it here and this is what we get. And then there is tautomerization and what you may get is ethanol. Okay, so ethanol is possible. From ethyne, ethanol is possible. Perfect. We got the picture right. What else? So if I talk about, let's say, propyne, what is possible? You can understand that if I'm talking about this terminal alkyne, then again you can imagine that OH will come here and what you get is, please check, a ketone. Why? The negative part is getting attached to that particular carbon which has less hydrogen and this particular carbon has no hydrogen, so that's what is a desirable site. That's why we are saying it regioselectivity. This is the region where the negative part will get attached, and once this is formed, there is tautomerization so that the product that is formed is this, right? What is this product? This is a ketone. Okay. What about here? Let's say we have an unsymmetrical alkyne now. So these are the two examples that we saw which were terminal alkynes. First was the simplest alkyne, which is ethyne. The second was any other terminal alkyne was giving us ketone. It was only ethyne which was giving us ethanol and aldehyde. Okay, so this is very useful information. Let's test now our skills here. When we have this unsymmetrical alkyne, now what's going to happen? Or I can say that we have a non-terminal alkyne. What's going to happen? So in this internal alkyne, where this triple bond is somewhere in between and not at the terminal carbons. Okay. So in this, we are again adding the same reagents H2SO4, HgSO4 and water. And you know that now where the hydrogen will get attached? Anywhere you can see that both the carbons has no hydrogen. So according to Markovnikov's rule, we can modify the Markovnikov rule and talk about the stability of carbocation also. But right here for us, let's take it very simply that you can put OH at any of the positions. Anyhow, you will get a ketone. Aldehyde was possible only when the starting alkyne was ethyne. Otherwise, no matter what alkyne you take, internal or not internal, right, we were getting ketones, right? So yes, ethanol when we are saying is quite probable. Ketones are certainly possible when we talk about this kind of a reaction, this kind of acid catalyzed hydration that we are doing on alkynes. But nowhere with no possibility can we get propanol, right? There is possibility of getting propane 2-on or simply propanone, but there is no possibility of propanol being formed. So the right answer to this question is none other than option C. What's in the name? Shakespeare once said. I say everything is in the name because check it out. The question is purely based on name reactions. If you individually pick up any of these options, all of them are name reactions. So the marks are in the name, the concepts are in the name, and of course the understanding is in the name reaction. So let's take each one of them individually. These are the options which are given to you. So we will be easily able to match the options once we know individual name reactions mentioned here. Let's straight away start with the first one, Rosenmund reduction here. What we do here, we take acid chlorides, okay? So RCOX, what X is what I'm talking about, let's say Cl, okay, are converted into aldehyde, RCOH. So you can see what's basically happening. By employing hydrogen over palladium, poisoned by barium sulfate. So you know that what is hydrogen over palladium capable of doing? It's capable of doing the hydrogenation, right? But we do not want full reduction to happen. What we want is partial reduction to happen in this case. So we do not want alcohol as our product, we want aldehyde as our product, so better to add a poison. The poison that we are adding here is barium sulfate. So what does barium sulfate do? It simply deactivates the activity of catalyst. Okay, so let's test the reaction once again. We take acid chloride, we add hydrogen, palladium in the presence of this poison barium sulfate, and what we get is aldehyde plus HCl. So we know that this is Rosenmund reduction, right? Now let's see Hell-Volhard-Zielinski reaction, HVZ. Okay. What do? It is used for the halogenation of carboxylic acids at the alpha carbon. The reaction usually requires less than one equivalent of phosphorus or a trihalide of phosphorus, right? So usually you will see red phosphorus written. Carboxylic acid is COOH. So the group of interest is this. The carbon that is directly attached to COH will be alpha carbon, and we must have hydrogen on this alpha carbon. So what happens is halogenation on this alpha carbon happens. Let's test the reaction here. So carboxylic acid, you can see there's this carbon with alpha hydrogen. So you add halogen, which is chlorine, in the presence of red phosphorus, and what you get is alpha chlorocarboxylic acid, right? This is HVZ, very important reaction from carboxylic acids. Perfect. So the HVZ reaction fails to accomplish the fluorination and iodination of carboxylic acids. Point to be noted, my lord. Cool. What about the third name reaction coming? Let's see another very important name reaction, which is Hofmann-Bromamide reaction. What is it? When an amide, RCONH2, when an amide is treated with bromine in an aqueous or ethanolic solution, okay, of sodium hydroxide, degradation of amide takes place, leading to the formation of primary amine. In simple terms, we have this RCONH2, remove the CO, we get RNH2. So from amide, we are getting amine. The product has one carbon less than the starting material, the starting compound. The name of the reaction is Hofmann bromamide. So check it out. Amide, you add bromine in the presence of NaOH, we get amine here. So take a note that the primary amine thus formed contains one carbon less than the number of carbon atoms in the amide. Because CO has been simply, when we see it superficially, we can understand that CO is missing in the final product, and simply what has happened is NH2 has got attached like this, right? CO and H2. Imagine the CO goes off and we get this. So the simple way of seeing it is this, and we know that the product has one carbon less. Well, the next one, the next name reaction coming here, another very important reduction coming here, which is Clemmensen reduction. So reduction of ketones to alkanes using zinc amalgam and concentrated hydrochloric acid. Let's test the reaction here, ketone, right? Or you can take an aldehyde as well. Let's add zinc amalgam, let's add hydrochloric acid here, and what we get is alkane. So let's go back to the reactions and see that whether you can analyze which is what, right? And see the correct answer for yourself. Look at this. The first one, the moment you see acid halide going to aldehyde, Rosenmund must strike your mind, right? When you see the other one, HVZ should strike your mind the moment you see chlorine getting attached to the alpha carbon of the carboxylic acid. The moment you see the CO missing, right? You know that we are talking about Hofmann bromamide reaction here. And when we talk about the D here, look at this. Simply CO is getting converted to CH2. So of course we are talking about Clemmensen reduction. So what's in the name? Of course the answer is in the name. So I'm sure the right answer to this question is crystal clear, which I'm sure you've already matched. The right answer is option C, the right answer. Now let's take a look at this googly question. Either the wicket will go down or you will hit a sixer. Let's see what you do. The question is from one of the underestimated chapters, which is Chemistry in Everyday Life. But I'm sure this paper, like I told you, is a tool to understand the pattern, to analyze the pattern. And if you observe that, yes, since a long time, the patterns are changing, the trends are changing, and these last chapters like Chemistry in Everyday Life, Biomolecules, Polymers, Environmental Chemistry are becoming one of the most important chapters from which a question absolutely comes. And it's a direct question that comes. It's a Control-C, Control-V from NCERT as well. So let's test it out. What do we have? We have Valium, morphine, norethindrone and vitamin B12. Okay. So we have to match. So again, a match the column is coming. So you can see that why this paper becomes important for us is because we understand that the way the framing of question is, right? So match the column are beautiful questions because if there is something that can go in 4 different questions, can be concised in a match the column and can be asked from one single question. That's why match the column are concise and beautiful, right? Let's see that if we don't know, let's say all 4 of them, can we still do this question? Everybody knows about morphine. It's an analgesic. Yes, we know. Everybody knows about vitamin B12. Your mom keeps telling you that if you don't drink milk, if you don't have yogurt, or in case you are a non-vegetarian, then eating chicken, eggs, all these are a very good source of B12, and deficiency of these may cause anemia, right? So this is also something that you can match very easily. Now, if we know only this much, can we still do the question? Let's see. So the best way for these kind of questions is whatever we know, at least find them out in the options and go by simple method of elimination, right? Eliminate the options which are not falling under what we already know. Like we know that check it out, for B we have 3, for B we have 3, B3, 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 okay, 3 of them. And for D we have 2, for D we have 2, D2 and D2. So okay, we are already now sure that answer can be B or D. So anyone, if you further know, answer is done. So if you know Valium or if you know norethindrone, you can easily do this question, which I'm sure you can. Valium is a drug which is used as a tranquilizer, relieves you from anxiety, right? Has many other properties. So, Valium, yes, tranquilizer. The moment you know it, you would know the right answer, isn't it? So, with A comes 4, so you know the right answer already. But let's do one thing. Let's see all these one by one. Let's check out all drugs mentioned in list 1, and let's also see what is vitamin B12 famous for, and the deficiency of B12 causes what. So Valium, another example given in your NCERT is, the other name for this Valium is diazepam. Diazepam, right? Diazepam, which is the drug that is used for treating anxiety, tranquilizes you, makes you feel relaxed. So given for the cure, for the treatment of alcohol withdrawal symptoms also. And not just that, I'm sure you've seen people, restlessly shaking their legs. Even this syndrome, which is called restless leg syndrome, for that also Valium is a drug that can be administered. Okay, so yes, it is also used for seizures, people who suffer from seizures. So to them also Valium or diazepam can be given. So different uses should be something that you must be knowing, right? The other thing is morphine, something that you already know. When there's severe pain, give morphine. It acts like analgesic. So used to help relieve severe ongoing pain, belongs to a class of known drug which is opioid analgesics. What about norethindrone? This is used for birth control. It's a contraceptive medicine to prevent pregnancy, right? Anti-fertility drug it is. Another very important anti-fertility drug that you must know is this particular drug which is called Novestrol. Simply Novestrol, or you can also call it ethyl. So the different names becomes also very important, right? Ethinyl, ETHYNYL, ethinyl estradiol, right? So this also becomes very important, again, as it is from NCERT. So these are anti-fertility drugs and vitamin B12. Pernicious anemia is the cause of the vitamin B12 deficiency, and sometimes the examiner may also write, instead of this, he may write Addison's anemia, means the same. So different examples, different medicines, everything given in NCERT from this chapter. Any single line can become a question, so you know that there can be plenty of questions possible, but one thorough reading and you know the right answer. So for this question, the right answer is option B. Now a simple, easy one coming your way. The correct order of the following compound showing increasing tendency towards nucleophilic substitution reaction is. So you know you have halobenzene as the common structure in all 4 of them. The only difference is, the first one is only chlorobenzene, ortho and para positions are not substituted. In second, only the para position is substituted with nitro. In third, we have ortho as well as para position which are substituted. And in fourth, the 3 positions are substituted, both orthos and 1 para, right? So if you know, there's a simple thing that you should know. More the electron withdrawing groups would be attached, easy it will be for the chlorine to be replaced by another thing, substitution. And that other thing is nothing but a nucleophile, so nucleophilic substitution. This electron withdrawing group makes a particular halobenzene in this case very receptive, very reactive towards the nucleophilic substitution, right? So yes, let's see the options out here. If you know this much, that how electron withdrawing groups are facilitating the nucleophilic substitution reaction here, the answers is like this. A very simple question indeed. So let's see actually the mechanism at play. So when we are talking about this aromatic nucleophilic substitution reaction, we know the leaving group that we have is chlorine in all 4 of them. But in the first one, like you know that when we talk about halobenzene, when I talk about, let's say, chlorobenzene, Then the chlorine shows plus R effect also. So there is a partial double bond character coming, making the chlorine less, susceptible for another nucleophile to come and sit at its place. Because there's a partial double bond character coming out there, right? Whereas if there is an electron withdrawing group present, things will be facilitated. So let's check out what's going on. We have a leaving group, which in our case is chlorine. And if there is an electron withdrawing group present, see how is it facilitating? How is it helping? So let's understand that what happens is, look at this. I'm showing you the attack of nucleophile here. There is loss of aromaticity for a while. This gets attached here. Look at this. Nucleophile is attached here. At the cost of aromaticity going bye-bye, right? So aromaticity is going away right now. And you can see that a minus is coming here. And this particular structure, if we see, is indeed stable because we have electron withdrawing group directly attached to this minus. So, of course, there will be neutralization of charge here, making this particular resonating structure as one of the very contributing resonating structures. So, when I talk about the next step, what happens is, so for a while things are taken care of, though at the cost of aromaticity. But you know that aromaticity is the leading factor towards stability. So, the leaving group has to go. The leaving group has the very name in itself, leaving. So that shall leave, which in our case is our chlorine. So that leaves and the nucleophile gets attached at the place of that leaving group. That's why it's a substitution. And how electron withdrawing group is helping should be absolutely clear, right? So we can say that this nitro, which is an electron withdrawing group, and this nitro helps in stabilizing the negative charge on the intermediates. And you must know now that everything is about stability when we talk about organic chemistry, right? What you're doing, what I'm doing, what you're aspiring for, everything is because you think that it will give you stability, right? So here, nitro group is going to help us stabilize that negative charge which is building up. So, can we say more the number of nitro groups, more will be the stability. So number of nitro groups are more, stability of intermediate will be high. And hence I can say more the number of nitro substituted aromatic halides, more will be the rate of the aromatic nucleophilic substitution reaction in the aromatic halide. So more the number of nitro groups attached to the aromatic system, right? Where we have this leaving group, easily the leaving group will leave and the nucleophile can come and sit at the place of the leaving group, making the reaction very reactive. So 3 nitro group attached will be the most quickest one as compared to 2 nitro groups attached, and then as compared to 2, of course 2 will be more than 1, and this halobenzene, just chlorobenzene, will be least reactive towards this nucleophilic substitution reaction, right? And hence the order is something that you all can easily think of. 4, then 3, then 2, then 1. So 4, then 3, then 2, then 1. That means which option? None other than option D. Being systematic is important, and this question will teach you exactly this lesson, that being systematic is important because it's a sequence-based question which says, what is the correct sequence of reagents used for converting nitrobenzene into meta-dibromobenzene? So the different sequences are given to you, right? Observe what is added: NaNO2HCl, KBrH+. So the sequence also matters here. Iron Br2 SnHCl, NaNO2HCl, Cu Br HBr, SnHCl, KBr Br2H+. So the moment you see reagents, the reactions should be, going in your head. You should be able to visualize what will be happening. So let me do one thing. Let me show you how to go about the perfect way for solving this kind of a question. So the first thing is, if there is this group which is given to you already in the question, which is nitrobenzene, right? So check it out that we want bromo at the meta position. So nitro can really help us because we know nitrobenzene is a meta-directing group. If we would have, let's say, reduced it and we have got, let's say, aniline, then NH2 is ortho-para directing. But we do not want bromine at ortho or para position with respect to this nitro. It should be at the meta position. So I think this is the best way where bromination should be done. And you can check out your options. The first step will only lead you towards the right answer. This is so crazily simple, easy question. Right? The very first step, if you could comprehend, the answer was like this. Anyhow, let's see the whole sequence. So we know that nitro group is meta-directing. So bromine will be directed towards the meta position so that we get meta-bromo, nitrobenzene. Now what do? Since we want, at the place of nitro, we want a bromine. So I think that you know the bridge of organic chemistry is benzene. And the way by which we can form this kind of bromobenzene is who helps us? The diazonium chloride salt really helps us, isn't it? So it's better to convert it into NH2 so that we can easily get N2Cl, N2 plus Cl minus, so that we can do either the Sandmeyer or Gattermann reaction. So that what do we get is a bromobenzene. Already the other bromo was at meta position throughout this. So if you know the reagents that can help us doing so, I think the job is done, isn't it? So let's see, if we add SnHCl, what will happen is there will be reduction of nitro group to NH2 group. And after this, what do? We can convert this NH2 to N2 plus Cl minus to diazonium chloride. Right? So this is what we get, and then we can do simple Sandmeyer reaction, CuBr, HBr, as the option is already leading us towards using CuBr in the presence of HBr to give us this meta-dibromo benzene, right? So the right answer is to this question none other than option B. Now comes a question to test your environmental chemistry knowledge. The question says, there's a statement 1 that says the value of the parameter, which is BOD. So examiner is helping you here that BOD is a parameter. Okay, so what is this BOD? Biochemical oxygen demand. Is important for survival of aquatic life. BOD is important for the survival of aquatic life. Okay. Statement 2, the optimum value of BOD is 6.5 ppm. So the statement 1 and statement 2 are given, and the question is that which one is true, which one is false. So one is false, second is true, one is true and the second is also true, one is true or the second is false, one is and the second one is. Both of them are false. So the question is basically finding out true and false, right? And we have made a MCQ out of it. Super. So let's understand what is BOD. If you know the definition as it is from NCERT once again, that it is the amount of oxygen required by bacteria to break down the organic matter present in a certain volume of a sample of water. So this is by definition what is BOD. And like I told you, it's a parameter. Parameter to check what? To check pollution. So there's a misconception that can be related to biological oxygen demand or biochemical oxygen demand. What is it? That higher the BOD, that means oxygen demand is very high. So the aquatic life is having a gala time, is proliferating. There is oxygen demand, that means more life, more proliferation of aquatic life. This is something which is a misconception. You must realize that when we talk about this biological or biochemical oxygen demand, it is the measure of amount of organic material in the water in terms of how much oxygen will be required to break it down biologically. And please know that higher the BOD, more is the pollution that means, because if the more organic waste is present, we are calling it organic material in the water, or I can simply say it, more the organic waste, more the organic pollutant, any which ways I can frame it, more will be the BOD, right? So now you need to understand that the pH also here, the pH of the environment has the profound effect on the rate of the microbial growth. Okay, so let's understand the minimum range and the maximum range, which is the desirable limit in which aquatic life needs the dissolved oxygen. You know that aquatic life needs oxygen for thriving, for surviving. And the range that is required is, look at this, 3 to 5 ppm, parts per million. So minimum concentration of oxygen which is required for the growth and activity of most aquatic organisms is around 3 to 5 parts per million. So the clarity of BOD should come from here, that when I talk about, let's say, the melting of glaciers. So when the glacier melts, you know the river comes out of it, right? So nearby, let's say, the glaciers, if we check the biological oxygen demand there, the BOD is less. There is low BOD, signifying there is less pollution in the water body, right? Whereas as we keep going on, okay, you see what people do. People are washing their clothes, washing their, buffaloes and cows near the water bodies. They are throwing all sorts of trash. Even the industries are there. So industries are throwing their emissions in the water. What happens? Pollution increases, right? Even the organic pollutants increase. If that is what that is happening, then if you see far away from the glacier, the BOD level, if we check, then that's going to be very, very high because of the large organic waste which is present. So high BOD. High BOD means that high biochemical oxygen demand. That means high pollution. That means the limits are crossing. Aquatic life will not thrive. There will be difficulty. Oxygen, the dissolved oxygen should be there for the aquatic life to thrive, and the limits should be not anything more than 5 ppm, right? So this is what that becomes crystal clear from here, that here if you check it's less BOD, whereas here if you check it's more BOD. So when we talk about the question, once again, the value of the parameter biochemical oxygen demand is important for the survival of aquatic life. This is true, but the optimum value of BOD mentioned is wrong. So statement 1 is true, whereas statement 2 is absolutely false, which makes option C the right answer. Now let's take up this question, which again reinforces that yes, NCERT is the holy book that we all have to refer. So check it out. The question is an assertion reasoning based question. So there's an assertion which is given to you. It says hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, but it is not the most abundant gas in the troposphere. Reason mentioned is hydrogen is the lightest element. Now the trick to go about these kind of questions is read assertion and reason in one go and put a because in between. And see if it makes sense. Is the reason making sense? So I repeat it once again. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, but it is not the most abundant gas in the troposphere because hydrogen is the lightest element. It sounds perfectly alright. In fact, if you have gone through the very starting, the very initial quote of the NCERT, it says that the 70% of the total mass of the universe, right, is nothing but hydrogen, and which makes hydrogen the major economy source also, isn't it? So if I talk about the giant planets like Jupiter, like Saturn, again hydrogen is very abundant there. But here the question is saying not about the universe but about the troposphere also. And we know that yes, in the atmosphere, in the troposphere specifically, hydrogen is very less, right? So the most logical answer looks like yes, hydrogen is the lightest element. So the reason looks perfectly alright to us, and hence we can say that assertion is also true, reason is also true, and reason looks like a perfect reason for the assertion. The logical explanation would be that it is lightest, that's why it is, least or less abundant in the troposphere. So the right answer to this question becomes none other than option B. Now comes a question for the Ruby lovers. Let's check out the question that says, incorrect statement among the following is, and your options are, VOSO4 is a reducing agent. Vanadilyl sulfate is a reducing agent. Let's check. Cr2O3, chromium oxide, is an amphoteric oxide. Option C, ruthenium oxide, RuO4, is an oxidizing agent. So is ruthenium oxide an oxidizing agent? We will check once again. Red color of ruby is due to the presence of cobalt 3+, is it? So let's do one thing. Let's take each one of them one by one. You should know that when I talk about vanadium, in vanadilyl sulfate, vanadium is present in +4 oxidation state, and the maximum oxidation state possible for vanadium is +5. So, +4 to +5, can it go from +4 to +5? Yes, it may. And if it does, it itself undergoes oxidation, so reduces other, hence acts like a reducing agent, isn't it? So yes, it can act like a reducing agent. Okay, Cr2O3 is an amphoteric oxide. Yes, chromium oxide can react with acids also, bases also. It is very much an amphoteric oxide, right? What about this ruthenium? Are you in the +8 oxidation state? Is it X minus 8 is equal to 0? So of course, ruthenium is in +8 oxidation state out here. So it can only go to lower oxidation states. It is in the maximum oxidation state and can go to only lower oxidation states. And if it itself undergoes reduction, will oxidize others, and hence it acts like it acts like an oxidizing agent, I can say, of course. The fourth one, beautifully in your NCERT, there are two gemstones mentioned. One is the ruby, the other one is emerald. Ruby red in color, emerald green in color. Responsible for both are chromium ions, Cr3+. So when I specifically talk about ruby, if we replace aluminium 3+ with Cr3+, what happens is, because of the DD transition, there is red color that you see, right? So please take a note that the mineral corundum is a crystalline form of alumina, Al2O3. A pure crystal of corundum is colorless. Pure crystal, the pure crystals of corundum, that is this Al2O3, but you will always find it with the traces of other transition elements. So if I talk about replacement of 1% of the aluminium 3+ ions with chromium 3+ ions, mineral will become deep red in color. The reason, like I told you, is DD transition, because of which you see red color, right? Which is present in this gemstone, which is ruby, beautiful red color. So yes, the right answer to this question is none other than option D. Now let's see this colorful question which says, the disonium salt of which of the following compounds will form a colored dye on reaction with beta-naphthol in NaOH? So what do we have? We have disonium salt, and the moment you see disonium salt, there is one particular amine which must strike your mind. Which particular amine I am talking about? Certainly I am talking about 1-degree aromatic amine. This is in fact the very test for the aniline, and the test is of course a diazo coupling reaction that happens. So let's see the three things which are very important. The first thing is disonium salt, the BDC, which you know is this benzene attached to N2 plus Cl minus. This is your benzene disonium chloride, or BDC. Okay, this is the first thing. Second thing, it says colored dye. In fact, you must know the color, right? When you will see this BDC reacts with beta-naphthol. What is beta-naphthol? Nothing. You know what is naphthalene? I'm sure you do, right? So at this is alpha position, this is beta. So at the second position, put a OH, this is beta-naphthol. And you must know that when BDC reacts with this beta-naphthol, diazo coupling reaction takes place. And remember, O is here, right? So when O is here, orange color is formed, orange red dye is formed. Okay, so the answer is right in front of you. Simple reaction. Of course, it is going to be aniline that will form benzene diazonium chloride. How? Add NaNO2 in the presence of HCl, maintain 0 to 5 degrees Celsius temperature. What you will get is benzene diazonium chloride, which can react with beta naphthol and show the diazo coupling reaction, which is a test for aniline, so that what you get is this orange red dye. Okay, so what is the right answer? The diazonium salt of which of the following? Of course, of the aniline. So the right answer to this question is none other than option C. Now this question in the JEE Mains has given us a lesson. One lesson is match the columns have become very important, and the practice of match the column, a good practice is indeed required. And the second thing is that the questions are not just framed on your analysis, on your logics, on your observations, on the experimental data, on your knowledge of the environmental chemistry, of the knowledge of biomolecules, chemistry in everyday life. Okay, these are the lessons that we have learned. But there are certain questions which are also based on your visual apparatus, where the examiner wants you to know the data as well. Okay, so that's exactly one of those questions. Let's see what it says. Lithium chloride, sodium chloride, rubidium chloride, cesium chloride, and the flame color wavelengths are given to you. Okay, so what do we have to do? We have to find out the correct answer. We have to match the correct answer. So for that, we should know that lithium chloride imparts what color to the flame, sodium chloride imparts what color to the flame. And if we get restricted to our knowledge of the atomic structure spectrum, that okay, when we talk about the visible spectrum, it is from 400 nanometer to 750 nanometer. And if you ask me, ma'am, we don't know where red lies, we do not know where violet lies, I can simply help you by making you recollect what you learned in your junior sessions, in your junior classes. Why is red color used as a color of danger? Why is it the color that you see in the traffic lights? As a color to stop, as a color of danger, because it has high wavelength. So we know red lies here and violet lies here. VIBGYOR, and we can write VIBGYOR accordingly, right? But this information may mislead us in this very question. That's why my job is to help you, make you understand where the things can also be misleading, right? So here the thing can be misleading. Hence it is very important to know the color. So let's see, when we talk about this question, of course we will be easily able to match if we know what color is imparted by what group 1 metal salt. You know that group 1 is famous for giving flame color to the oxidizing flame. And yes, the reason is also very important that alkali metals and their salts impart characteristic color to an oxidizing flame. Heat from the flame excites the outermost orbital. You know, group 1 elements would readily give 1 electron, right? In order to attain the noble gas configuration. So heat from the flame excites the outermost orbital electron to a higher energy level, and when the excited electron come back to the ground state, there is emission of radiation in the visible region, which is this. As it is a table from NCERT, it's a control C, it's a control V. Same as it is data is utilized by the examiner, and you should know the color. Crimson red is for lithium, for sodium yellow, for potassium violet, for rubidium red violet, and for cesium it is blue. Okay, and if you remember the colors, I am sure then the wavelength is something that is also some, these are the digits maybe you would have to remember. Finding a logical explanation to this may be beyond the scope right now, right? So yes, my suggestion would be to go by the data to go by the analysis, only one such question in the whole 30 of the questions of chemistry is there, where some digits requirements are there from the NCERT. But the moral of the story is very simple, that NCERT is very important. The data also which is given in NCERT is very important, right? So let's appreciate it. If you would have known the answer immediately, you would have marked option D as the right answer. Okay, another name reaction waiting for you, which is Gabriel Thalamide synthesis. If you know about how Gabriel Thalamide synthesis happens, the question is very simple for you. The total number of amines among the following which can be synthesized by Gabriel synthesis is, and these are different compounds given to you. It's an integer type question, so you have a vulture eye for the different amines, which should be the 1 degree amine, with the knowledge that yes, with Gabriel Thalamide synthesis we cannot prepare aniline. Okay, so you know this amine, which is aromatic amine, which is benzene with NH2 attached, so this becomes aniline, cannot be prepared from Gabriel Thalamide synthesis. Otherwise, whatever our 1 degree amines can be prepared, and you know nitrogen attached with 2 hydrogen and 1 alkyl group is a 1 degree amine. So 3 of them is what we can see. But to test that why can we not form aniline from here, let's check out what is Gabriel synthesis all about. So here you know that Gabriel Thalamide synthesis mechanism happens in 3 steps. This synthesis is used to get primary amine from primary alkyl halide. Okay, so if we are using RX, right, with the thalamide, which is, let's say this thalamide, add KOH, you get N minus K plus some ionic behavior you can observe here, and then we will add RX here, and we cannot add here chlorobenzene or any halobenzene. If we do, you know that the plus R effect of chlorine or any other halogen will play its role. Though we know that inductive effect for halogen is more dominating as compared to resonance effect, but nonetheless resonance is certainly very much at play, such that the double bond character is coming, right? So there will be no reaction with, let's say we add chlorobenzene here, but any other alkyl halide we add, we will be successful in getting our 1 degree amine, right? So you can check that Rn gets attached here. Now it's very simple. The step 3 is simply you can get RNH2 from here. So here what's going on, that hence amine which can be synthesized by Gabriel Thalamide synthesis methods are only the primary amines and not the aniline, not this aromatic amine. So the right answer is 3 for this question. This one, and this one. Now this last question for the day comes up with a moral lesson for us. Why are we doing this whole paper solution out here? You know, is for that we can understand the pattern. The agenda was not just solving the question but also analyzing the pattern, see how the trends are changing, how the patterns are changing, and work accordingly. Extrapolate it, apply it, implement it, and change our schedules accordingly, change our learning patterns accordingly, change the focus areas accordingly, right? So, is this question reinforcing what I just said? Among the following allotropic forms of sulfur, the number of allotropic forms which will show paramagnetism is? The question is again an integer type question. You just have to give answer in an integer. So the options which are given to us as alpha sulfur, beta sulfur, we fairly have an idea that these are S8 molecule, right? Whereas what I just said, we are analyzing this February paper, happened in 2021, so that we can do our preparation of the further mains that will be coming accordingly, right? This will help us in not just finding out what we have done, how we have performed, what is the need to cry over the spilt milk. What we have done is already something that we have done. right? You can just pick up the answer key given by NT and you can find out how you performed. The agenda was not this. Agenda was to analyze and extrapolate it. So is what we're going to do here. We don't know out of sulfurs who is paramagnetic. Never done that. How do we now find out the answer? Though we know something very important is that oxygen, O2, and we know the MOT also of O2. We know oxygen, O2 is paramagnetic. But this S8, be it alpha form or the beta allotrope, we know that they are not going to be paramagnetic. So if this much is something that you can understand from the pattern, the job is done. Let's see. You know that according to MOT, paramagnetic have unpaired electrons, whereas diamagnetic, all electrons are paired. So when we talk about this alpha sulfur, which is the rhombic sulfur, and beta sulfur, which is monoclinic sulfur, both forms are crystals of S8 molecules. Everything is paired there, so it is going to be diamagnetic. But if we have little knowledge about oxygen, the whole concept can be, understood easily. So in S8, each sulfur is bonded to 2 adjacent sulfur atoms, and hence it has 2 lone pairs and no unpaired electron, making it diamagnetic. Okay, of course, makes sense. But yes, at elevated temperatures, this S2 form is the dominant species and is paramagnetic like oxygen. Okay, like oxygen. There is always a pattern that is repeating itself. If you have a vulture eye for it, if you're able to catch it, you're going to nail it. You're going to sail through fruitfully. So, of course, I'm sure you can see how many, only 1. So, the right answer to this integer type question is 1. So, ace it.